Welcome to today's seminar on the Design and Building Practitioners Act and what you need to know, do and know about the legislation before it comes into effect on July 1. The aim of today's seminar is to help you to build a roadmap of the important elements that contractors and consultants should now be thinking about considering within their businesses. Today, we're going to talk about topics such as superintending projects and how some of these elements may be contracted out, what kind of auditing and submissions to the planning portal you will need to provide and who provides it, who carries the risk, and what you should be looking out for in any of your future contracts. Thank you to those who have already submitted questions prior to today's webinar. We're going to try to get our speaker to answer these as she goes through her presentation. If you do have any questions, please type them in by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And at the end, you can put your virtual hand up, we'll unmute you and you can ask your question. On behalf of ACRA, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Jessica Rippon to our virtual stage. Jessica is the Principal Solicitor at Construction Legal with over 20 years legal experience specialising in construction law and litigation. Throughout her work, she acts for a broad range of clients across both government and private sectors, including Parramatta Council, Daycorp Constructions, NBN Co, Downer EDI, Winton Property Group, and Keppel. After publishing her thesis on the strata living crisis in 2018, Jessica was invited to share her ideas of reform with the Building Commissioner, and she has worked closely on the Pillar 6 initiative, which involves the introduction of decennial liability insurance into the New South Wales building and construction industry. Over to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Kieran, for that wonderful introduction. Welcome, everyone. I hear that there are a lot of participants on this webinar today, so I'm going to try to keep this 1 hour session as engaging as I possibly can. Today, we're going to be talking about the hot potato out there in the industry. I'm sure everyone's heard about the Design Building Practitioners Act, which actually came into effect last year, but the regulations just came down a month or so ago. And there is a lot in those regulations, so we're going to be talking through those main topics today. I think we might wait for questions at the end if we have time, and if we don't have time, Kieran and I can always send through an email to everyone trying to respond to everything. So with that in mind, these are the things we're going to touch on today. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of why we are here today with this new legislation. Then we're going to run through this concept of regulated designs. I'm sure everyone knows that certain practitioners that want to work on high-rise developments will need to be registered, so we can talk through the registration process. There's also a new process about declaring designs and then lodging those designs through the government portal. So we can just go through the various stages of that process. Then we'll quickly touch on insurance, what it means in terms of the new insurance you're going to need to get, what your contracts now need to say, what areas you need to update them so you're protected. And then we'll do a refresher on the statutory duty of care. Some of you may have heard that regime came into effect last year, and it has retrospective effects. So it's really, really important that all the engineers out there and all the consultants and designers understand what that means for them. And finally, we'll quickly touch on penalties if you don't comply. The additional requirements around keeping records, and then just the continuing professional development. So if we start with topic 1, the overview. So what is the DIB Act and why do we have it? Just quickly, we'll run through it. The Act came into effect last year. It's all about keeping practitioners and industry participants accountable in all the work they do in Class 2 buildings. And it's all about bringing the confidence back into the sector. This was an initiative, or this is part of the 6 pillars of reform that the Building Commission is rolling out. And it all sort of started after the Mascot and Opal Towers. You may recall that after those events, a Shoebridge inquiry was undertaken by the government, and a lot of learnings came out of that, and the Building Commission was implemented out of those learnings. And David Chandler, he's been doing a wonderful job. He was then appointed as the commissioner to oversee these initiatives and try to get confidence back into the industry. So the DIB Act is part of Pillar 1. Pillar 2 is the risk rating system that the Building Commission has implemented. That's all about letting industry know which players are trustworthy, which combinations are not so trustworthy. For example, a developer plus a builder and a certifier together might be known to have been problematic in the past. Whether those 3 participants are then doing future works, just being aware of which projects are doing well and which projects aren't. So that's all about the risk rating tool. And then we've got the other platforms such as education standards. And as Kieran mentioned, I've been working on Pillar 6, which is seeing how the rest of the world are doing it and what learnings we can bring to New South Wales and how we can do things better. So what will the Act actually do? So if we can put the Act into 3 broad categories, the first category is this duty of care concept. And that's been now in effect for a year. I'll come to that in more detail in the next section. The next part of the Act deals with declarations. And this is where it's going to be really important for engineers and designers to know what they have to do. This process starts in a month or so. And then, of course, the registration scheme. So today we're going to be focusing more on declarations and registrations, because that is what's going to start, that is what's going to be implemented on 1 July 2021. So the first question is, what does this Act apply to? So if there are participants in the room listening today that don't do work on Class 2 buildings, then this Act won't apply to you, and you won't need to be registered. But it will apply to all Class 2 buildings. So Class 2 buildings is defined in the Act. So any work involving coordinating, supervising, making alterations, repairing. I know that there's a lot of people listening that do a lot of remediation work and repair work. So if you're doing any of that work on a Class 2 building, this Act will apply. And it's not just a high rise. It could be 2 or more dwellings, a granny flat with a 2nd story, for example, because they are separate dwellings and combined they are 2 or more dwellings. So it's not just high rises. So be warned that there are other types of buildings that could fall into this definition. Also, of course, mixed use buildings. Now, what does the Act not apply to? So interestingly, while I was preparing this seminar, I was reading the new regulations, and there are a lot of exemptions, and even within the exemptions, there are exemptions. So it takes a bit of time to go through it and unpack it. But if we can just look at each of these in turn, the Act won't apply to exempt development. So a development that doesn't need a DA or doesn't need a CC. Waterproofing alterations to a single dwelling, that's exempt. Any work done pursuant to a council order. So I think that the best example there is if a building has an order for the cladding to be repaired, this Act won't apply. And that's quite clear in the exemptions. And then there's all the work that councils have power to order under the EP&A Act. This Act won't apply to those works. And then there are specific sections of the BCA, specific exemptions that where BCA provisions don't need to be complied with under the EP&A regs, that won't apply either. So they're not straightforward and clear. So we just got to track them through really carefully. The list continues. So anything to do with repairing and renovating and carrying out protective treatment works to maintain a fire safety system. However, if that maintenance is to the entire system, then the DIB Act will apply. So that's an example of a carve out within a carve out. If you're doing maintenance work on one component of a building with regards to mechanical or plumbing or electrical, and you're only dealing with one component, then the Act won't apply either. But then if you're dealing with mechanical, plumbing, electrical on an entire component, then you will need to be registered and carry out regulated designs. And then the other three on that list, fairly straightforward. If you're not doing residential building work, the Act won't apply. So sometimes you might be doing work in a mixed use development, shopping centre below and apartments on top. The works you do in the shopping centre won't attract the requirements of the Act, but the work that you do above will, provided that that shopping centre has 2 or more stories of resi. And then finally, electrical work, plumbing work for a performance-based solution that doesn't relate to a building element. So you can see here the concept of building element. That's really important, and we'll come to that in a moment. So what does this mean for remedial works? This is just a sort of an important takeaway slide. For me, the legislation is quite complex in terms of how to work out what works are excluded and what are not. So you need to track through these exclusions very carefully if you're just doing remedial repair works. Some works won't attract the Act and some will, if you're working on entire components. If I give you an example, waterproofing. So if you're engaged to carry out waterproofing works as a builder, and those waterproofing works are to the entire building, you're going to have to get a registered designer to prepare those designs because that work is not exempt. So I think moving forward, everyone's going to go through a lot of learning. There's going to be a lot of confusion, but the main point here is if you are unclear, please get some legal advice to help you work through your specific role and what you do. Okay, so the next section is all about regulated designs. So once you determine that you're going to have to do works in Class 2 buildings that might be caught by the Act, all designers and engineers are going to have to become very familiar with the concept of regulated design. So after 1 July 2021, certifiers will not be able to issue any construction certificates or CDCs unless they have received certain declarations and compliance certificates. Now, those regulated designs have to go through a specific process before they become regulated designs. So we'll go through that process soon. But in terms of the definition of a regulated design, you've got to go through some steps. So step 1, a regulated design is only a design if it deals with a building element, and we're going to come to that in a second. Or if it's a performance solution for a building element, or if it's any other design prescribed by the regs. Now, there is nothing else prescribed by the regs at the moment. But I feel like this legislation is constantly changing because last week I found an amendment bill already being tabled in Parliament, which when once passed will amend the legislation. So I feel like it's going to be a journey for industry participants and a journey for government as well. Just lessons learned and updating as we go. So building element, really, really important. So if you can think of, I like to think of building element in terms of major defects and minor defects under the Home Building Act. So a major defect is anything to do with, you know, fire safety, waterproofing, structural, so load-bearing components. Also, any aspect of mechanical, plumbing, and electrical that the BCA have specific requirements for, that will also now be called a building element. And then there is a component of a building that is part of a building enclosure, the part of the building that physically separates the interior from the exterior. So facades and things like that. That's also a building component. Building element, sorry. So if you're working on a building element and you're doing design and it's in a class 2, then you're going to be preparing regulated designs and you're going to need to be registered. Okay, engineers. There are also some prescribed areas for engineering works. So we've got structural engineers, civil, mechanical, fire safety, electrical, and recently added through the regulations is the geotechnical. Now, engineering works, there is a definition of what engineering will be. So any work requiring the application of scientifically based calculations, work that requires the application of engineering principles, construction, production, operation, etc. And again, for remedial consultants and engineers, construction actually includes repair work and renovation work. So now for the exciting parts. How do I register? Okay. So I've tried to summarize a lot of information diagrammatically here for everybody. So if we can think of 4 main classes of practitioner that the regulations provide a lot of detail on. We've got a designer, we've got the principal designer, we've got the engineer, and we've got the builder. The builder is sort of like the principal contractor. So within each category of practitioner, there are subcategories that you can choose to be registered under. So design practitioner has the most categories. So we've got architects, drainage designers, fire safety designers, electrical designers, facade designers, the list goes on. And the designer can be a company or it can be an individual. Then we've got the concept of principal designer. So that would be, for example, if you're working in an architectural firm, you could have your employees registered as a designer, and then you could have the director of that firm or that company registered as the principal designer, who will then have final sign-off. Engineers, similar categories to those in design categories, the geotech, mechanical, structural, civil, electrical, and fire safety. So that's fairly straightforward for the engineers in the room. And the builders, I like to refer to them as principal contractors because it's easier to understand in practical terms. So the principal contractor that actually has control of the site, they can register in 3 categories. The company can be registered. They can register their nominee. So if you think about the New South Wales Fair Trading building, residential building license, there's always a nominee there. So that nominee can now be registered, or the individual can be registered. So I think that this table will be quite useful for you to sort of work out which category you're going to fall into. And there's a reference also to the regulations there. The regulations are really helpful. There's pages and pages of detail for each engineer, for each designer. So I urge everybody to go through the regulations. I can send a link to the specific section if anyone's interested afterwards. So what will they do? So we've got the classes of practitioner down the side there. Who are they? The designer is the person that prepares the regulated design. Once that design is prepared, they also have to lodge declarations for that design. When I say lodge, they have to package them up and give them to the builder to lodge. So then the next category is this concept of principal designer. Now, I think what's going to happen is the builder is going to nominate a principal designer, because that designer will then have the job of collating all the designs. So they're going to have to perhaps have a list of all the engineers and all the designers on the project and collate every single design from each of those consultants. Not only will they have to collate the designs, they're going to have to make sure that each consultant ticks the box and signs the form, which will be now available on the website soon, the government website. There'll be forms. Those forms will be called design compliance declarations. So the principal designer will have to collect all these forms. They then, and that's the same for the engineer. So the engineer and the designer will then give all their declarations to the principal designer. They then certify the package of designs. They then hand them to the builder. The builder then also has to go through everything, make sure he's got all his documents in check, and then declare another certification. That certification is called the Building Compliance Declaration. So if we can just sort of summarize that again, we've got design phase where the regulated design is completed by the engineers and designers. They then provide a compliance declaration. All those designs go to a principal designer. He then signs off and gives his principal compliance declaration. Then all of those documents then go to the builder. The builder then ticks it off, signs another declaration, and all of that is then lodged through a portal, which will become available on the 1st of July. And I just hope that the portal doesn't crash, because I think everyone's going to be online trying to work out what it looks like. Okay, so just quickly we can run through what you need to start thinking about now.
Jessica?
Yes.
Sorry, just a question. Some companies out there have design and construct capabilities. So, for instance, some fire engineer companies will do the design and the work. So, do they need to can they register as a design practitioner and the building practitioner, or is that not going to be allowable now under the new Act?
Okay, no. So as long as that builder or that company is the only builder that's commissioning that work or being engaged by the owners to carry out that work. For example, if an owners corporation engages a company that's got building and design capability, and that company is appointed as the sole builder, the principal contractor, the builder that's got control of the site, then that company can be registered as the builder as well. Okay. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does.
Yes. And a lot of the designer's job will also be to check which materials, say, for example, certain materials are nominated and products are nominated. It's the designer's job to make sure that those are the appropriate materials that are being used. Yeah. Okay, so and I think once the form comes out, there was a form in the old the draft regs, but that form has now not found its way into the regulations. And I rang up the customer service planning portal a couple of days ago. My staff rang up and they said, look, where's the forms? And they said that the forms aren't available yet. The forms are still being prepared. So it is really a situation of, let's see what happens on 1 July and let's just try to deal with it the best we can. In saying that, there is a lot of things you can start thinking about now, because there's going to be a lot of tick the box sort of requirements. So if you can see this slide, this is not the right slide, but I'll come to it. You're going to need to get police checks, for example, and gather all your degrees and all your education qualifications. And I know mine was stuck in a box in the garage. So some people might not know where their qualifications and, transcripts are. So these are the things that we need to start getting ready for now. So just to recap for the builder, you can be an individual, a body corporate, or a nominee. It goes without saying that you actually have to have a residential building license. The nominee can be registered. Most builders I work for, the nominee is usually the director. So you can choose to have the nominee individually registered or the company. Probably for probity, I would imagine that people are going to choose that the company is registered. You're going to have 5 years of recent experience in Class 2 buildings. So it has to be relevant experience. And you have to know the basics of the BCA and the EPNA Act. So for designers, similar thing. You've got to have 5 years recent experience doing design work in Class 2. It goes without saying that you need to know what the BCA is. In terms of a principal designer, it's very similar to the design practitioners. And I imagine that the principal contractors out there are going to start nominating companies to take on this role. Engineers, you've got to be registered with a recognised body. For example, in Engineering Australia, I'm not sure what the body is, but once you've got that recognition, you just apply to be recognised under this system. You have to have 4 years of experience, and you're going to have to know the area of engineering that you're going to be practicing in. So that's fairly straightforward. How and when to register. So I mentioned before, from 1 July, the portal is going to be open. I don't know if it's going to crash or not, because at 9 o'clock, everyone is going to be trying to log in to see what it's all about. But the way that the government has set this up is, as long as you get an application in on 1 July or from 1 July, you can still continue to do work because you're going to be known as deemed registered. So the concept of deemed registered is they don't want to slow construction down. So everyone's going to be registered if they apply. And you'll continue to be able to do work unless, in a few months' time, you get an email saying your application's been denied. I think from memory, registrations are 3 and 5 years they are valid for. So 1 July, get your applications in, you'll be deemed registered, and that's going to allow you to continue to do work. If you're not registered and the builder comes along and asks you to do certain work, you're going to have to say, hey, I'm not registered, I can't do it. So the key takeaway from today is know what you need to work out now to fill in those forms on 1 July. Okay, so this is what I was talking about earlier. The list is quite extensive. Proof of identity, that's pretty easy. There's a learning component. So if you log on to the New South Wales planning portal and you Google Construct New South Wales digital learning platform, there's a course there that you can take. And if you complete that, that's one box ticked. Sorry, there's also another module called Value of Australian Standards. So you're going to have to do that as well. National police checks. From memory, they take quite a long time. So I would start doing that now. And then the remaining requirements, just your licenses and your proof of qualification and degree. But if you go onto the Fair Trading website, I've got the link there. There is so much information, and it's actually set up really, it's set up quite easy to follow. It's really useful. So I urge everyone to read through the websites and familiarize themselves with those requirements. So, transitional requirements. This is quite complicated. So I'm gonna take you through it quite slowly. If you haven't started building work under a CDC or a CC before 1 July, then you're going to be captured entirely by this new regime. But if you have started construction work before 1 July under a CDC or a construction certificate that's already been issued, that work won't be subject to the new regime, but the designs that underpin that work, you're still going to need to lodge them through the portal. So the builders will still need to lodge those designs through the portal. And obviously all subsequent building work after 1 July will need to be lodged and comply with the new rules. What happens if come 1 July, you're not registered, but you've done some design work for a builder? What the builder can do is appoint someone as a principal designer that is registered. So some independent designer can be appointed. The builder then can take your design and say, can you please check this and issue a compliance declaration for me? And that will satisfy the requirements of the Act. It's not an ideal situation having someone else sign off on your designs. So I think in terms of best practice and accountability, everyone needs to be registered. Okay, how does this system link with other registration schemes? So we've got, the Architects Act and, Engineers Australia. They all work in parallel to this new regime. What my understanding is that all those bodies now are going to be talking to each other moving forward. Okay, so the declaration process. So, okay, I'm going to break this up into 3 stages. And I think this is a really, really good way of condensing a lot of information into one diagram. So before work begins, what do? We carry out a design. We work out if it's to do with a building element. If it's to do with a building element, be it repair work or renovating, then it has to be a regulated design. So you prepare your regulated design and then you declare it. So the registered building practitioner will then issue a building compliance declaration. Once those declarations, once the regulated designs are prepared, the principal designer collates everything. And then once everything is collated and the designers have signed off and the principal designers have signed off and the builder has signed off, so there's 3 sign-off phases from the 3 practitioners, then it all gets lodged into a portal. Now, this concept of principal designer, I know I've been speaking to David a few times, and he's very strong about the need for having one person remaining accountable. So what he wants to know, if something goes wrong, he wants to know who it was at the top of the tree that had final sign off on the design. Because at the moment, everyone's sort of pointing the finger at everybody and no one's taking accountability. So that's where this concept of principal designer comes in. It's the main guy that's going to put his hand on his heart and going to put his license on the line to say, I have gone through the entire design package and I say it complies and it's all tickety-boo. So this all happens before anything on the ground occurs, before the shovel hits the ground. So what happens during construction? I think everyone can agree with me when I say that almost every construction job has 100 variations. Not all of them will relate to a building element or a key design area. But if they do, you literally have to start the process again. So if the builder comes up to the consultant and says, we've got to amend your design, and that design is a regulated design, then the builder has to nominate a place and a time for the designer to come to their office, to go through all the variations, go through all the designs, and then the designer will have to recertify and redeclare that design. I think a good example is when a developer puts a DA in, and then once construction starts, they lodge a section 455 for additional levels on top. Now that might require the design to completely change, for various elements. So that's a good example of having to declare variations after construction. So from a design perspective, the job's not over once you've signed off on the project at the beginning. If there are variations, you're going to have to go through it all over again. Okay, stage 3. So we've gone through the pre-work, we've gone through during construction, now we're at the completion phase. So the developer must notify the builder when they intend to apply for an occupation certificate. So if the builder wants to apply for an OC, he has to tell all the designers. All the designers have to be notified. The registered building practitioner then issues a building compliance declaration. Again, they then have to send all this information to the PCA, right? And remember, while this is happening, the builder also has to, or the developer also has to notify the commissioner under the RAB Act. So the commissioner has powers to do random checks on your buildings before an OC is issued. So this process of notifying your certifier is in parallel to notifying the commissioner that you intend to go for occupation certificate. So there's going to be a lot of checks and balances when the builder or the developer puts his hand up and says, I'd like an OC, please. The certifier then gets the entire kit and caboodle of documents. He then has to go through it all, satisfy himself that all the declarations have been obtained by everybody. And then he then issues an occupation certificate. Now, once you get your OC, the builder or the developer then has 90 days to lodge everything with the New South Wales Planning Portal. So the idea there is that the government at any point in time has every piece of information to do with that project, every piece of information. At the moment, it's scattered. Council has a DA, the PCA has, OC documents, might have CC documents. The builder might have some as-builts. Consultants might have their engineering drawings. At the moment, various industry participants have bits and pieces of a project, but now it's all going to sit in one portal. So that's the idea. Okay, so moving now to insurance and contracts, and I know that this has been a worrying discussion for for some participants in the market and also insurers. So in terms of contracts first though, everyone needs to start thinking about what documentation they are using at the moment and whether that documentation is suitable for all this new for this new regime, the new requirements. When I was drafting this seminar, a few issues popped into my mind. Things like practical completion. If I'm a developer, I want to know that the builder is on the hook until all these documents are lodged on the portal. So I won't want to give him PC until I'm satisfied that he's complied with the Act. So that's a change I might want to initiate. I might want to make sure that all my consultants sign contractual warranties, warranting that they're going to be registered, they're going to maintain their registration. I might even want to know what their registration numbers are, because the last thing I want is for a design forming part of my building to be done by someone that's not registered, because that's going to cause problems. And theoretically, the certifier won't be able to give you OC because he's then got to tick the boxes as well. Variations. The need for a detailed design process in a contract, saying that all variations have to be redeclared. And, what about a default mechanism? Is it a material breach of your contract if your registration is void? So these are the fun and exciting topics that you can speak to your lawyer about. And I'm happy to speak to anyone that needs any help auditing their contracts. You'll have my details later on, but even if you don't contact me, this is really, really important, and I'm sure your insurers will want some assurance that your documents protect you as well. So with insurance, there is this requirement that everyone is going to need to take out special insurance, but you don't have to be too stressed out about it now, because you've got a year to sort it out. So there's this transitional period where you can still work as a registered practitioner. You can still issue compliance certificates without special insurance for a year. From my understanding, the government is in talks now with a lot of insurance bodies to try to persuade them to offer this product to the market. I know insurers are quite skeptic, and I can imagine that premiums are going to go up, especially with the statutory duty of care, which I'll come to. So the government's, I think, given themselves a year to talk to insurers to try to force their hand to actually offer these products to the market. So just quickly, if we run through, with your insurance, when you get it, the insurance has to cover you for all the work you do under this Act. And you can get company insurance or individual insurance. The building practitioner insurance is a funny one, I think. They're going to have to get some sort of professional indemnity insurance, in addition to the contract works insurance that they get and the public liability insurance and all the other various insurances. I think that's what it's going to look like, a separate PI cover. There is an exemption in the regulations. It was quite interesting. I read a part of the regulations say that if a building practitioner cannot get insurance, they can apply for an exemption, but that exemption will only apply if the secretary or the government is satisfied that you've got adequate insurance in place. So this is going to be a really interesting topic for me. I've got my ears to the ground talking to a lot of insurance companies to see what they're thinking and how they're going to offer this product. Practical implications. In terms of insurance and the statutory duty of care, so what that statutory duty of care is it's retrospective. So every designer or engineer that has done work on a Class 2 building for the last 10 years, if that building has defects and the owners corp, for example, decide to commence legal action, they can commence legal action against that engineer or that designer or architect or whatever it is, if that work was done on and from 10th of June, 2010. So that's 10 years of retrospectivity. What that means, interestingly, is there's going to be a lot of, and I hope there's not a lot of legal action that comes out of this, but I know that the Supreme Court is full. There's a backlog of litigation that they're trying to get through because of this DIB Act. What it's going to mean is that there's going to be some consultants out there that are not going to have insurance because PI only covers you for 6 years. So there's going to be a bit of a gap risk. So fingers crossed that all the work that everyone's done doesn't have any issues that come out as a result of this new statutory duty of care. And I know some insurance won't moving forward, I know that some insurance won't cover for economic loss, and statutory duty of care is for economic loss. So it's going to be really interesting. I know that a lot of engineers, consultants and certifiers, there's a lot of nervousness out there in the industry, and rightly so. It's because they're exposed that there's a gap in the insurance. You know, some insurance won't cover pure economic loss. So, you know, I've even heard from some certifiers that people are just exiting the market. So it's going to be interesting times ahead. Oh, statutory duty of care. We've sort of talked about it. What is it? So just quickly, it's registered practitioners that perform construction work. So again, you know, repairing, altering, you know, renovating. They are on the hook from 10th of June, going back 10th of June, 2010. If any defects arise, they could be liable for action for pure economic loss. And I've just sort of put there for you what construction work means for you to take a note maybe later on. So what is a statutory duty of care? It's a duty owed to each landowner, so, and subsequent landowners. So just think of owners corporations. Now they've got not only the capacity to, you know, sue the builder, sue the developer, they can also come after practitioners, designers, engineers, so to speak. So you can't delegate that duty to someone else. If you were the one that did the design and you signed off on it, that's it. You can't point the finger somewhere else. And as I said, it's retrospective. So any work done 1 June 2010. And this is huge for the industry. It's not very often that law has retrospective effect. So it is a big thing. Okay, we're coming sort of to the tail end of our presentation now. I'm glad to say. We're just going to sort of wrap up by giving an overview of what happens if you're naughty. So if you're guilty of an offence could be you breach a condition of your registration, you don't, your registration, you breach a condition in preparing a regulated design, you don't declare your designs properly, you engage in conduct that falls short of what the conduct of a reasonable engineer. That's quite wishy-washy and broad. And then there's another one, if you just completely have willful disregard to matters, then you'll be in breach. Penalties, just to focus everyone's mind. So what the government can do, they can issue you a notice to show cause. Please explain yourself. If after you've responded and explained yourself, they feel like the breach is severe, they can take proceedings against you, or they can issue you a hefty fine. And they can also suspend your registration, which essentially means you won't be able to do any Class 2 building work, design work. So it's really important that we comply. Record keeping. So from 1 July, we're going to have a lot of admin to do, everyone, a lot of admin. We're going to have to keep documents for 10 years. I know the ATO only requires 7 years, so we've got another 3 years of additional record keeping obligations. So we've got to collect information about every project we work on, the developer's name, the class of building, the lot number, who engaged you, what you did, what you declared, all the sort of practical, obvious information. So this is actually quite a handy slide. So depending on who you are, this is what you're going to have to keep. Designers have to keep their designs and declarations. The principal designer is going to have to get a lot of storage space because they're going to have to keep everybody's designs for 10 years. The same applies to the building practitioner, but he's got more work to do. He's got to keep his variation statements. He's got to keep all his applications with the certifier. So that's also something that we have to take note of. So this is the last slide for today. Just quickly, I think architects and engineers already do this, but for builders, especially, we've got to continue our education. So if you go onto the portal, I think that's a live link there. There's going to be a lot of information, easy to follow, what you need to do, you know, how many points you need to accumulate per year. So go and check out that link. So you maintain your registration. And that's all I have to say, everyone. I hope that you found this webinar very informative. I'm happy to sort of take questions offline or by email. I think we've got a few moments, so I'm happy to try to answer some questions as best I can. Kieran?
Thanks, Jessica. I think that's a fantastic presentation, and to condense all of that information from the Act into an hour. We have got a couple of questions. Just a couple of, I guess, some clarification type questions. So a lot of what we do in the remedial industry is to older buildings that are outside of the warranty period. So if we have to do waterproofing repairs to one balcony on a 40-year-old building, yes, does the Act apply, or does it not apply if it's just to the one balcony?
Okay, so I think you fall into an exemption. So if we just go back to the exemption slide, there was an exemption that says that if you do work to a single dwelling, then it's not regulated, right? So you can have single dwellings within a high rise, for example. Where is that? I think it's one of these. It's listed in here. But yeah, so the answer is if it's a single dwelling, then it's exempt. Where is it? It's not there. Well, I've just told you. It's a single dwelling.
So what about then to take that the step forward then to the roof? So if it's the waterproofing to a flat concrete roof, would that then, because it's common property, be covered by the Act?
Ah, that's interesting. So I think you need to go through the steps of whether it's part of a building element. So is the roof load bearing? I'm not sure. We've got to go through the whole.
Yeah, so this would be mainly sort of a concrete flat roof that's had a waterproofing membrane on.
Yes.
So then, yeah, so it's not that we're talking sort of a structural load bearing element of the roof.
Okay, but is it then my question would be, is it work to the entire component? So if you're doing works to the entire roof and it's waterproofing, I would say it sounds like it might be regulated.
Yep.
So these are the hoops that we're going to have to go through now to determine whether it's regulated or not. But there's going to be probably a lot of information that comes out from now on. And this question, I can, take it offline and think about it in detail. So I don't give everyone a bum stare and say something incorrect. But intuitively, I would say if it's the entire roof and it's the entire component, and waterproofing is one of the things that David is very passionate about, waterproofing. So it sounds like it might be regulated.
Yep, I think so. What about in the process? So can any work start until all the designs are lodged? Or is it everything goes in and then we start on site?
So are you talking about a big project or remedial again?
Well, I mean, remedial, in saying that, remedial projects can be to an entire high rise. It could be worth, $6, $7, $8 million.
Yes.
So it's still a large project. Can any work start, or do we have to get everything lodged through the portal and then start setting up on site?
Well, it's sort of like stage one, this one here, right? If you determine that you're doing regulated work and it's part of a building element, then I would say this slide would apply. That is, you've got to get all your ducks in a row and lodge it all and then start. Yeah. Because why would there be a difference between, the entire project from, a high rise or remedial? I wouldn't make a distinction like that. I would say that this design and declare and consolidate and lodge would apply.
I'm just having a look at some of the other questions. I think a lot of the questions we've got are all of a similar vein, with different element. And I think we are going to be up for an interesting time, July, August, when there's a lot of projects. I know we personally at the business I work for have looked at a lot of projects that should or could be starting July, August that are residential, and are probably at the very closing end of a contract being awarded in the next couple of weeks, and but no work will start before 1st of July. So it could be a very interesting time for a few people out there in the next couple of months.
It's going to be really interesting, especially for the lawyers, because I don't know if you recall, I mentioned before, they've already introduced a bill to amend the Act and the regs. So it's constantly moving. So I think everyone's going to be learning together, and that goes for the building commissioner as well. Everyone's learning at the same time, but it's a good initiative. It's what we need, and it's all about the confidence, putting the confidence back in the market so people buy units.
100%. I think to everyone who has been to our audience out there, all of the questions we've received, we're going to send through to Jessica. And then we'll get a response on those, and then we'll send them back out in one of our regular updates. So some of your questions are all being recorded, so we'll get to them all.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you, Jessica. Fantastic.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye. I'm sorry.